Committee on Public Accounts, Songezo Zibi, who's based in South Africa in the National Assembly. And he says Parliament is like school because at some point they have to go to recess and they take a break. They have a timetable. So if your national parliament is figured out in that way, you'd also remember that Pan-African Parliament itself has a timetable, which means that only at specific moments in time is the Pan-African Parliament fully seated, but also fully available to hear certain people. And so it's important then to think about how to keep the work of Pan-African Parliament visible and engaging and engaged, even when those sessions are in recess. So ultimately then that work means that those avenues and those access points for civil society need to be active even when Parliament is not in session. And so that's the second objective that we organized the Pan-African Parliament CSO Forum around. But thirdly, we wanted to also organize civil society on how they can conduct democracy, civic participation in human rights alongside Pan-African Parliament. The relationship that you can form as a CSO organization in relation to an institution that's as significant on the continent as a Pan-African Parliament does provide significant weight, firstly in terms of legitimacy and credibility, but also in terms of the access of archives of knowledge that the parliamentarians themselves have produced, but also archives of knowledge that exist within the African Union infrastructure. And so it's important then when we think about the power of CSOs and the ways in which they mobilize, that our work doesn't just exist in the streets, in protesting, in advocating on the streets outside only, but it's also about how do we empower ourselves to be in a better position to engage with our parliamentarians at a national, regional, as well as at a continental level. And so those are the three objectives under which the Pan-African Parliament was formulated. And of course, I'll take you through a list of some of the significant convenings that we've been able to undertake over the past 7 years. So in terms of how the CSO Forum has engaged Pan-African Parliament so far, firstly, we've engaged at committee level. The first one being the one on justice and human rights. We've engaged a committee on gender. We've engaged a committee on international relations and cooperation. We've also engaged the SADC caucus specifically. And of course, this engagement includes both technical support and capacity building. In terms of capacity building, we've convened trainings specifically around African and human rights systems, the Maputo Protocol, the rights of elderly women. Of course, that's a very important marginalized group that we don't often talk about because we always talk about the youth bulge, but we also don't talk about what's on the other end of that spectrum. But furthermore, we've also been able to convene trainings around illicit financial flows, access to information during elections specifically, human rights guidelines in support of justice and human rights for persons living with albinism. That's been a very specific area of expertise that we've been able to work on. We've also engaged committees on matters related to the Eastern DRC and Sudan conflicts. We've done trainings on with the SADC caucuses around trends and lessons from the 2024 elections, for instance. Elections do provide us an opportunity to engage about what's happening, what's the way forward, and how do we consolidate democratic learnings in that sense. We've also engaged through the PAP CSO Forum with the Office of the Legal Counsel, providing technical support. And I use we in the royal sense. A lot of this action is led ably, as I said earlier, by the Center for Human Rights through the PAP CSO Forum. Of course, the Center for Human Rights specifically has a program around human rights and democratization that they provide at a master's level. And so they are, through them, we're able to then place students inside PAP to provide technical support on that subject matter. And so in that instance, it's under a project called the Civic Clinic Project that says we give these students an opportunity to work with PAP directly for 6 months. And also, in addition to that, they develop human rights compendiums. Those compendiums are available for download, and they've been translated into English, French, and Portuguese for download on the Center for Human Rights website specifically. But we've also done a bit of advocacy through development of the advocacy toolkit that we align to PAP PAP protocols in particular. Very significant convenings in 2021 and 2022. We allocated a graduate to the Pan-African Parliament, which worked with the legal counsel of the Pan-African Parliament, who was a master's level graduate, of course, from the center. In 2013, we engaged with the Office of the Pan-African Parliament Liaison Office for PAP CSOs, and we ensured that we had someone stationed at PAP specifically to deal with anything related to CSO issues, CSO engagement with PAP itself. We've had convenings on the sidelines of the Pan-African Parliament. Whenever it sits, we would convene civil society on the sidelines. Of course, Bonolo has already spoken to you about the one that was held in 2018 with about 20 people that looked a bit, haphazard, but it was a starting of something very special. And of course, 2 of those were hosted also in 2019, one in 2020 that was held online as a result of the COVID pandemic that we were all confronted with. Importantly and most significantly, in 2023 and in 2024, the first of its kind civil society parliamentary dialogue was hosted with the capable leadership of PAP. They were able to recognize the need to be able to have something official where parliamentarians would be in the space of listening to and engaging directly with civil society. In those instances, we were able to have the voice of civil society talking about various human rights issues being adopted by the parliamentarians who were in the room to be explored in the various committees of the Pan-African Parliament. And then, of course, finally, we were able to convene regional trainings. Of course, some of them have been talked about already in Kenya, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mozambique. And all of this, a fundamental part of this is done through partnerships, because civil society can't function in your own silos. It's important to collaborate more often, but I want to mention specifically the partnerships that we were able to have with Zalendo Trust and PN Africa in ensuring that those convenings were able to happen. Of course, let me, before I hand over to the rest of us in the room, unpack some key learnings for us in the space of convening Pan-African Parliament for close to a decade. The first is that inclusion does create legitimacy. If you consider the drafting processes on continental free trade protocols or the African continental free trade area, when civil society voices were present, that includes farmers' unions, youth collectives, women's cooperatives, those conversations were richer. Those conversations were able to provide trade-offs that were clearer. They were able to create more legitimate outcomes because you engaged people who were working in the sector, who didn't have any partisan ambitions for the sector. But furthermore, we think that it's important to elucidate in terms of our second lesson that partnerships require trust and openness. And this doesn't happen automatically. It's built over time, tested by disagreement, but also fundamentally strengthened by transparency. There have been moments, as His Excellency has talked about as well, when CSOs have accused PAP of being opaque. So you're transparent, but not really, But at the same time, there's also been moments when parliamentarians themselves have said, but you guys are unfair. You're not engaging with us in good faith. And so it's important that when those types of disagreements happen, that we find space for meaningful dialogue between the stakeholders that is then able to and create an opportunity for a more balanced framework that we can both respect. And of course, these tensions might be quite tense, may be quite difficult, but if we handle it in an open way, we can increase the strength of that partnership and that relationship as we've done over the course of the years. Of course, the last one, the third lesson that I'll talk about is capacity and access matter. So even the most inclusive processes falter if participants cannot meaningfully engage. Too often, critical documents are shared in one language, digital platforms exclude rural communities, or travel funding limits access to a privileged few, or attendance to a privileged few. Capacity building itself is not a charity. It's part of a democracy's infrastructure. So it's important then when we think about CSOs engaging with parliaments, that we think about providing trainings for local organizations in treaty monitoring or budget analysis, and ultimately that empowers them to be able to engage with PAP and other institutions of the African Union in a more empowered, confident way. The translation of PAP resolutions to Kiswahili, Arabic, Portuguese, and local languages continues to ensure that communities know their rights and can hold their leaders accountable. Of course, for us moving forward, we want to be able to say institutionalizing participation by embedding civil society consultation in PAP's rules of procedure does a lot to say we acknowledge and we are embedding the learnings from our engagement. It's important that when we do so, we structure, we turn these acknowledgements into structural commitments in terms of the ways in which PAP itself works. Strengthening accountability through regular reporting on how PAP resolutions are implemented in member states is an important part of how we continue this relationship. Expanding resources for civic actors, maybe not coming directly from PAP, but thinking about how the CSO forum itself can start to mobilize resources to ensure that civic actors, especially those representing marginalized groups, can also remain informed is part of the work that the CSO forum ought to be doing. But lastly, and not least, is the idea of harnessing technology to broaden access without sacrificing depth or quality of engagement. Briefly, that's how the work that we've undertaken has grown over the course of time, and we hope that through continued collaboration with institutions such as yours, we will have more of an impact, more visibility, and a more strengthened PAP at the end of the day, and ultimately a more strengthened continent for the purposes that we convene together. And lastly, might I just say, as someone who works a lot in community, sometimes podiums aren't as empowering as we think they are. I prefer to walk around and engage with people, but for the purposes of this engagement, and I know there are translators at the back that need me to be at the mic, can I take hands? And the hands are either a commentary on some of the work that you've had about the PAP CSO, where you hope to see improvement, what the learnings we can take back to our respective national parliaments and regional parliaments, but also just tell us briefly, what's been your experience of engaging with organs of the African Union, particularly parliaments, both regionally as well as continentally when it comes to PAP? Where do you hope to find more access and more engagement? Luckily, His Excellency is still in the room. And of course, if you are finding challenges even at your national space, the former minister is still in the room as well. She's familiar with the workings of National Assembly in Namibia, but of course, more generally, what's happening on the continent. So there are important resource persons, not just myself, because I don't have a doctor in front of my name as well. Thank you. That was just a way to see whether people are listening, but I guess not. Okay, cool. So hands, please. If any. At the back, yes, sir. 1, 2, 3, 4 for now. Okay? 5, okay. 5 for now. In that order. Yes, sir. If you might introduce yourself, your institution, and your country.
Thank you very much. My name is Jacob Makambwe. I come from Zambia, from the Zambia Council for Social Development. Just to listen to your presentation, a very good initiative for the creation of the Civil Society Forum. And I think some of the concerns that we've always had, especially the civil society, in engaging with institutions like the Pan-African Parliamentary Forum, or maybe any other platform, for example, let it be at the SADC level. There's always been inviting civil society and giving them some sort of do's and don'ts, that when you come to this platform, these are the rules that you have to follow. Because at a certain point, and I heard that His Excellency was talking about the issue of sovereignty. And if you have been accredited to sit on a certain forum at civil society, at times you are not allowed to give the views that are contrary to what that particular forum is actually trying to look at. So sometimes civil society is just used for the purposes of being there and the name to say that they're civil society that are representative, but in the actual sense, civil society do not actually have that autonomy to give dissentive or views that are contrary to what is actually happening. And I think one of the issues that I also wanted to react on before your presentation was what His Excellency was talking about, that the Pan-African Parliament, at a certain level, they've got limitations in terms of influencing what can actually happen at a national level. Are we going to create and going to continue to create platforms or these particular forums for the purposes of just ticking the boxes that in Africa, yes, we've got the Pan-African Parliament, and yet we cannot actually give this particular parliament powers to override some of the issues that are actually coming at a national level, other than looking at the issues of sovereignty. In the other issues, you are talking about bridging the democratic gaps. Don't you think that is the right time that Africa must define what type of democracy we should actually uphold as Africa? Because as much as we are talking about suspending other member states because they would have actually taken another route which is undemocratic, we do not take time to actually check what is causing these countries to take that particular route. One is really not having control to their own natural resources to develop their own nations, which are actually controlled by the Western or the outside people that are coming to control our resources, and they take them out. And no wonder they take that particular route. And I hear that also His Excellency talked about civil society joining and being co-opted into this as a process of trying to go into the democratic way. Don't you think in Africa we really need to have our own definition of what we can call democracy, and to actually put legislations and laws that are going to protect our own resources for our own development in Africa? I submit.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you so much. My name is Chemonges Timothy. I come from Uganda. Mine is around the question of resources, the question of financing, which plays a very critical role in how civil society and the regional bodies interact. As we've all experienced with USAID getting out of the space with very minimal impact still remaining, many of us, including the regional bodies, have greatly been affected. And for me, it's around how the regional bodies, let's say PAP or even AU itself, can start the conversation on rethinking around African financing for itself, and if there is any sort of that kind of thinking. Because at the end of the day, we see that for AU, of course, which is at the apex, still struggles in terms of the question of financing itself. We still, rely so much from the external support, and that greatly compromises even our ability to do some things. And for the civil society organizations that ideally should be streamlining towards that direction, and many of them are struggling, I think the conversation on how do we identify our own resources, even if it meant working with our own private sector, working with our own philanthropic organizations or group of that. Is there any thinking towards that direction or any innovative ideas towards innovative ways of identifying resources to implement the work that we do? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The third hand, please.
Can you hear me? My name is Elroy Paulus. I'm a South African. I'm on the PMG board. So I work with Khalib and Huda and Rashad. My question is not exclusive to your input, Spamandla. It's a general question, but you touched on it. You spoke or alluded to the fact that when you include it, it gives civil society legitimacy. Now, whether you travel from Alexandria to the Pan-African Parliament, whether you travel from Soweto to the Pan-African Parliament, which I understand, given the fact that I'm from Cape Town, is between 16 kilometers in the case of Alexandria and 51, 52 from Soweto on average. Now transpose that to a national parliament, which is under Table Mountain, and the cost of getting there, if I live in the southern suburbs, I'm spoiled for choice. I can take a train, I can take my car, or I can take a bus. And it'll cost me less than, well, the train would be the cheapest, 15 Rand to Cape Town and 15 Rand back. Okay, that's very cheap. By car, it's about 20 kilometers to Parliament. But for a year, I worked, who of you are from Cape Town? Who's from Cape Town? Okay. I worked at the ECV Vana Center, which is in Kailicha, and it's about 27 kilometers from Cape Town. Even digitalization doesn't work. Can I tell you why? Because the ECV Vana Center, a major hub of economic activity in Kailicha, supported and built by Atlantic Philanthropies and the state, the mall there. There are certain days that there's no point in going to work. You know why? Because the SASSA offices is opposite, and the hospital is there, and Home Affairs is there, and everybody's standing in the queue, and they're trying to get signal, and you can't even get LTE. But that's not what only angers me. What angers me the most, not only in the sense of access to either the Pan-African Parliament or national parliaments, is the cost of data. Vodacom, Cell C, MTN. You try and buy, in the case of Vodacom, 500 megs. It's going to cost you $50. So the cost of data is hugely exclusive. When cell phone signals came to South Africa, they actually proposed an agreement, I don't know how this would work, that if somebody needed to make an emergency call, you would lend them the phone, your phone. Okay? It's noble, but that phone can disappear. The point is, I think we should also speak about the cost of data in terms of having virtual access to Parliament, but also, in the case of South Africa, the persistence of apartheid spatial geography is a form of exclusion from people accessing places of legislative consultation, whether it's national parliament or Pan-African Parliament. Sorry, I spoke long, but I'm very passionate about this issue. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Very important inputs. I think there's a fourth hand at the back, and I'll come to you, ma'am, as the most important voice in this round of hands.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Muhammad Aded Ali. I'm from Somali Nini State Actors Sonsa, Civil Society Network in Somalia. Currently started to monitor parliament sessions in Somalia. Thank you very much for your brief explanation and lesson learned from your side and your organization in this country. I need to ask one question about committee level meeting or committee engagement. For our side, we are challenging last 3 months for engaging committees meeting. That was difficult for us because the Burma members committees, they seized the way they engage the parliamentary system is a secret issues or there's tangible issues that's difficult for us to engage them and to participate their sessions meeting. For example, Committee on Human Rights and Committee Budgets and other committees. So for your lesson, when you are engaging the committee, how did you approach in terms of legislative process or other parliamentary procedure system? Did they allow both of all or specific issues only engaged with the parliament committees levels? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for our last hand in this round. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
OK. Bonjour, je suis Alexandrine Adjibi Dato du Bénin. Je voudrais partager l'expérience du Bénin avec vous. Et au Bénin, nous n'avons pas la plateforme, mais nous avons un réseau, dit réseau du Parlement ouvert, qui regroupe un nombre important d'organisations de la société civile. Et grâce à l'appui financier de PN Africa, nous avons pu travailler avec le Parlement béninois pour son ouverture à la population. Et les actions que nous avons eu à mener a permis à un grand nombre de députés, leur a donné l'occasion de présenter à la population ce que fait le député, quelles sont ses prérogatives et quelles sont ses limites. Et ça a permis aussi aux populations, parce qu'il y a eu des émissions interactives où les populations ont pu poser des questions directement aux députés, et ceci en plusieurs langues nationales. Ça a permis aux uns et aux autres de comprendre ce que le député fait et quel est son rôle de représentant et quel est son rôle dans le vote des budgets et quelles sont les préoccupations que le citoyen peut porter vers le député et ne pas attendre du député, par exemple, de réaliser les routes qui mènent vers la communauté ou son rôle n'est pas de donner de l'argent aux indigents de toute la ville, de tout son village. Donc, ça a été une vraie occasion pour les députés de se faire entendre. Et l'impact était tellement fort que même le président de l'Assemblée a voulu ressusciter une des pratiques qui existaient, mais qui, entre-temps, ont été oubliées. Il y avait la sortie du député sur le chemin du village qui permettait aux députés de sortir, d'aller rendre visite, de se rapprocher de la population pour échanger avec ces populations. Mais ces pratiques qui étaient oubliées, ça leur a permis de revenir sur ça et de réinstaurer cela. Et si j'en parle, il reste quand même un défi important, c'est que nous avons pu faire ces actions grâce au financement de PN Africa. Et actuellement, on a un autre financement qui nous permet de continuer, mais ça rejoint un peu la préoccupation de mon prédécesseur. Ce financement, si on doit attendre que le financement vienne de l'extérieur, est-ce qu'on pourra continuer? Est-ce qu'on pourra assurer la veille en tant que société civile de façon continue? Quel est le mécanisme que nous devons trouver? Et je pose la question en même temps à nous aussi. Quelle est la méthode que nous devons trouver? Est-ce que c'est par le Parlement lui-même ou par la société civile elle-même pour trouver le mécanisme pour pouvoir assurer pleinement son rôle de veille, de suivi parlementaire pour que ce dialogue entre représentants et représentés puisse être efficace et continu? Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much for your engagement. If I may start with the last one first, I think congratulations on the work that you've done. Can we give her a round of applause and her team, SPM Africa? Very important steps in undertaking more open parliaments that legitimately engage citizens on the ground. So the other challenge that we spoke briefly with some colleagues over lunch about is how there's a failure to institutionalize best practice across parliaments, both national, regional, and sometimes even continental, on the basis of the interface with parliament that often citizens have is with the elected representatives and very little with the administration. On the one hand, there is an administrative infrastructure that exists at various levels of parliament that ought to also be thinking about how to create mechanisms that are institutionalized and are part of the fabric of the ways in which those parliaments function so that it doesn't rely on one elected representative from one term to the other. The second part that might contribute to that, if in reference to PAP specifically, is that the fact that elections happen all the time, people get replaced in national parliaments based on whatever the partisan interest might be in those parliaments, it does impact on the level of historical knowledge that exists even inside parliament because of the change of faces so often when it comes to the representatives that are deployed into that space. And then of course, lastly, but more importantly, I think that for the by and large on the continent, our elective our electoral systems don't align with our intended gains in terms of the ways in which we want constituencies to be represented and spoken to. Our over-reliance on parties generally undermines the ways in which constituencies can engage with individuals that we deploy to parliament. In South Africa, the constituency system as it relates to the National Assembly is a mess, for instance. We have someone who is from the Limpopo province that is supposedly deployed to a constituency on the basis of where they fall in parliament to the Northwest province, which are two completely different linguistic communities, but also in terms of culture and the ways in which they might engage, it is completely different. And so that becomes an issue of alignment of systems versus what we intend to have out of those systems. I think those are some of the key things that we need to engage with. Of course, lastly, in response to that point, and of course, I think it speaks to a lot of the other questions around financing. On our side as civil society, something that we need to try and work ourselves out of is these stop-start initiatives on the basis of where funding is and isn't. A lot of it we should take onus and say every year we're piloting a different type of intervention with the same institution on the basis of what funding we got that year or that financial year. And so that becomes a bit of a problem in terms of ensuring that we ourselves have the relative historical knowledge that from one year to the next and the ways in which we engage with Parliament itself. Part of how we fix that, of course, is through trying to create more streamlined opportunities for engagement through instruments such as the PAP CSO Forum. Part of the challenge of suggesting multiple ways or points of entry into an institution such as Pan-African Parliament is because there's recess, because there's a change of leadership sometimes, the lack of historical knowledge, you lose the momentum for some of the very key initiatives that you want to build. But also, in addition to that, citizens' issues don't fall away just because Parliament is in recess. We continue to be confronted by challenges across the board, regardless of whether Parliament is active or not. And so how do we leverage the relationships that we can build between each other as civil society in order to empower more spaces, even with engaging directly with the Office of the Clerk and the Bureau, for instance. And so those are important spaces to think about. Of course, when those questions were asked, they weren't being asked only to me. If someone else in the room would also like to be able to, throw a bit into that based on what's coming out, we more than welcome it. The other questions that we can go back to, sorry, I just lost my page. There were 4 other questions. This is why technology is important, because then I'd be scrolling on my phone as opposed to flipping through my own handwriting that I sometimes don't understand. Okay, so in relation to some of the other questions, how did we engage with committees specifically? What are some of the things that we can share in engaging with committees? So and perhaps it goes to the first question that might have been asked. So in passing, yes, we need to guard against being co-opted as civil society. Unfortunately, parliamentarians and politicians in general will find the easiest mechanism to try and make the most of what their term looks like. We need to ensure that as much as we're working actively to try and partner, that we also don't fall in line with what they would rather have as opposed to what we've been mandated by our constituencies. And so we need to place the efforts and the voices of the people that we are supposedly representing in the space at the forefront, not just prioritizing the relationship that we might be building at that point in time. It's important to strike a balance between those two efforts so that we don't look like a proxy of a particular person, of a particular individual or committee, for instance. At the same time, what I want to also emphasize is that the ways in which we organize a civil society aren't always aligned to the ways in which parliamentary processes function. And so it's important to think about how to best utilize the existing protocols, mechanisms for functioning of that parliament in order to empower yourselves, empower your constituency, and ultimately get your goals met. You can't insist on engaging in the same way you would with your comrades on the ground with elected representatives. We recognize that there's a huge ego behind it, but there's also a recognition that they didn't get there by magic, that the process of campaigning and being elected quite often does require that you are addressed in a particular way that gives respect to the office. And quite often we forget that we're giving respect to the institution, and we might feel a certain way about the person who's occupying that institution, but ultimately we still respect and care about that institution, and we need to continue to respect that. And that doesn't mean that we're being co-opted by falling in line with that protocol. But ultimately, so the ways in which we've engaged committees in particular, there's a recognition that we can't have access to all of the committees. But if there are issues that require our attention as civil society, we will be mindful of them, and we will ensure that we use targeted engagement, both with the perhaps legal office specifically, but also the chair of committees has been very helpful in this regard, in line with the office of the clerk in Pan-African Parliament. Those are some of the mechanisms through those institutions that have been touch points for us in engaging in that space, and so we think that that's continued to be valuable and has won us the right sort of gains in that respect. Yeah, I think there were 3 other questions, but I think I've addressed. So financing is something that we've spoken about. We need to pool our resources together for purposes of ensuring that if things like data, the very important tool that was mentioned earlier that PAP has for us is the formulation of model laws. It's not just for PAP, for instance. If you find that there's a specific issue that you're concerned with on the continent, there's an opportunity that's provided for you to give input to what should be prioritized as a model law. PAP has the mechanisms to be able to create that model law through consultation with civil society, and then we can use that as an opportunity to mobilize and advocate for it at our national parliaments, for instance. Say you are a signatory to so-and-so protocol, PAP has come up with a model law on data and the cost of data. Well, how are you using that tool, Minister? How are you using that tool, MP, Honorable Member? If you're not using it, we can then also, because we're very good with the use of social media and media to create pressure, we can also do that as well. Ultimately, unfortunately, spatial apartheid exists in this country in particular, but I do recognize that the urban-rural divide exists across the continent as well, and it's important that we demystify the space of democratic participation. That's where I would like to end it for today, if you don't mind, in the interest of time. But I really appreciate the quality of engagement so far, and I wish you the best. There's a burning hand there. I will take it. I will allow it. Thank you so much.
No, it's not burning. It's just a hand. But I just wanted to compliment on the what, because of the work that I do, the influence of tech. Talk about even emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, and especially machine learning, and generative AI, Internet of Things and all those things. So for us, creating spaces,
creating not alternative spaces for citizen engagement, but actually creating spaces for citizen engagement using technology. So it's not only the cost of data that inhibits citizens' participation in parliamentary processes. Access and infrastructure is also concentrated in the urban areas. Rural, peri-urban, it's a problem. When you move from kilometers from here going into rural South Africa, I think infrastructure is not there. So before they could even talk about data, they have to talk about the quality of the signal. Affordability, yes, but affordability, you can also talk about it from a gender lens. The gender pay inequality between males and females, women and girls, you get the point? Eh? All those things, and we've seen it with the work that I do with the colleague here. He does it from Zimbabwe, I do it from Zambia. And we're seeing these real issues where we want to bring parliament closer to the people, but using technology, but you find that internet penetration rate, in Zambia we don't know whether it is 57%, whether it is 64%. So find that we want to take parliament to the people using technology, but to who when the people are offline? So I think these are things that we have to think around as we do the advocacy, because we have noted, you see, in sub-Saharan Africa, the media space is really problematic, and there's this rapid shift to digitalization, going online. But these issues that we're discussing are actually stopping citizens, including the development of legislation, are sitting in the way. In Zambia, there's what we call 5 pillars of digitalization: innovation, entrepreneurship, infrastructure and access, education and awareness, literacy, okay? And the development of what? The development of legislation. So in 23, we did a self-assessment, our government did a self-assessment, which was a very good thing. And the score was around 23, 24, and 32, somewhere there. The highest score was around 45, which was on the pillar of developing law and policy, and you know the conversation around cyber legislation. So when we're doing this advocacy, I think we can take that as a model to look at how can digitalization be at the center. I know the people, I'm also doing work around the OGP, Open Government Partnership. We are not prioritizing digital governance as a key pillar of digitalization, because even our own governments that we are working with are taking their services online. But to who? When the people cannot use the technology, when the people cannot access the technology. Parliaments are improving their websites, and they have become more versatile, download speeds are increasing. But the women and girls and youths don't have the skills to download these documents so that they can understand parliamentary processes and engage. The hand was burning, but I'll leave it here so that we leverage the time. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I'm sure our colleagues who are chairing the session appreciate that as well. Can we give ourselves a round of applause for that high quality engagement? See, I told you the hands that you did at the beginning were allowing for me to do a very good job, and so appreciate me for that as well. I would like to apologize. I do have to get going. There's a by-election that I'm monitoring in my local town, so I will be leaving this evening. I hope that you have a fruitful engagement, and thank you very much for the opportunity from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamandula. We have had a beautiful flow between the sessions that had happened in the morning right through to where we have just ended up, having started with our official opening, ceremonial opening, the engagement with on the issues relating to the Pan-African Parliament. And of course, this particular session that threw more light on what has been done under the auspices of the Pan-African Parliament Civil Society Forum and the way forward, including opportunity for all of us to share some thoughts on how we have also gone ahead to engage. But all of these things are nestled within the context of opening up parliaments, making parliament more transparent, accountable, encouraging citizens' participation in the work of Parliament. And that is where we will be jumping on into our next and final session for today, or for the day. Of course, bearing in mind that we have the gala dinner later in the evening, so while the atmosphere is bright, the last session for the bright part of the day. Then, of course, in the evening, we'll have our session. And this is going to be a World Cafe kind of conversation for the next hour to close us off for today, in time for us to go back to the hotel and get ready for the gala dinner. But I am not the one to introduce to us how that is going to happen, what the details are. Joining me to do that is, and it's important that I do a better introduction before you take the podium, Halib. The very project that has been the fulcrum around which this conference has been organized is actually a project that is managed by Halib. And he has been leading in team meetings, in the planning, the processes, all throughout. He's the one who can perhaps modify your accommodation checkout time. He probably may not allow you to come into the gala dinner. You know, all of those powers are within his hands. And so the instructions that will follow from when I have left, and he is taking the microphone, please pay attention to them so that we will be able to abide by that. But Halan will run us through what the next session will be like, and then we'll take it up from there. A round of applause for the man who has struggled a lot in making sure that we all come here and have a good conference, please.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you. I'll do a quick run through what the exercise is going to be about, and then I'm going to send you out of the room for tea. Right? Because we have to dress up the room a little bit. And then so you'll have a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back. Today that we've heard a lot, there's been a lot of talking from the podium, and we have had some good engagements already. So the next exercise, we want to deepen that. And in this case, it's going to be about us speaking to each other. And it'll be, I'll lead the exercise. There'll be 3 rounds of conversations. And you will have an opportunity to speak to 4 colleagues in each of the rounds. All right? Those colleagues will change. So that's the other thing. So we really want to get conversation going across as many people, and so that you get to meet as many of the people in the room as possible. What we are going to do, because as any continental meeting, we have language challenges. So we are going to create 3 stations for our Francophone colleagues, so that in fact you can speak in French. You don't have to have the translation, yeah? And then in the other tables will be English Anglophone, because the majority of us are speaking English, and our Lusophone colleagues. So the translator for the Lusophone group will also be following or translating. All right? Okay, that's as much as I want to say to you for now. All right? Can you digest that as you grab some tea and coffee? And in about 15 minutes, come back into the room, and then I'll give you some further instructions. Okay?